My name is Annie Parker, and I'm 34. 3 weeks ago, I sat in the very back pew at my own sister's wedding because my parents put it in writing that they didn't want me ruining the pictures. My sister was marrying the man who used to wear my engagement ring. My parents covered every penny, the floral arrangements, the banquet hall, the drone circling above the church like a mechanical hornet waiting for its moment. 200 guests watched Lauren glide down the aisle, and not a single one of them noticed the plain manila envelope resting in my handbag 12 rows back. What I did during the vows knocked the air out of every person in that building. My mother still hasn't pardoned me. She probably never will, but the envelope comes later in this story. First, you need to understand what my family taught me about photographs, because everything that happened in that church traces back to a picture taken 22 years ago. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, the place where family secrets finally surface and quiet women finally find their voice. If you've ever been the one your family kept just outside the lens, this one's for you. Tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and make sure you hit subscribe. I've worked as a paralegal at Hartwell & Boone for 11 years. It's a 2-attorney practice on Main Street in Maple Glen, Indiana, population 9,000 and change. I live by myself in a rented duplex on Sycamore Street, with a coffee machine that seems to run on pure stubbornness. My work is details deadlines, filings, certified copies, the unglamorous paper scaffolding that holds other people's lives in place. I'm good at it, and the skill runs in my blood. My grandmother, Ruth Wade, spent 31 years as a deputy clerk in the county recorder's office. When I was 7, she taught me spelling by drilling me on the names of Indiana counties. When I was 17, she gave me the only rule she ever called sacred. People lie, paper doesn't. She said it with the same reverence other grandmothers reserve for saying grace. Grandma Ruth passed 2 years ago at 84, in her sleep, which was the single merciful thing that year handed us. She left behind a modest lake house on Church Lake, and a trust she'd assembled from 3 decades of county wages, roughly $240,000 for each granddaughter, Lauren and me, payable when we married or turned 35, whichever arrived first. The lake house came to us jointly, half mine, half Lauren's, every plank of the dock and every crooked window screen included. My mother referred to the trust as Ruth's little project. My father just signed wherever the attorney indicated. I called it what it actually was, the only inheritance in our family that arrived, wrapped in love, instead of conditions. Grandma Ruth left us one more thing she never put into writing. It took a wedding, a stranger's phone call, and one manila envelope for me to grasp what that was. I've worked as a paralegal at Hartwell & Boone for 11 years. It's a 2-attorney practice on Main Street in Maple Glen, Indiana. Population 9,000 and change. I live by myself in a rented duplex on Sycamore Street with a coffee machine that seems to run on pure stubbornness. My work is details deadlines, filings, certified copies, the unglamorous paper scaffolding that holds other people's lives in place. I'm good at it, and the skill runs in my blood. My grandmother, Ruth Wade, spent 31 years as a deputy clerk in the county recorder's office. When I was 7, she taught me spelling by drilling me on the names of Indiana counties. When I was 17, she gave me the only rule she ever called sacred. People lie, paper doesn't. She said it with the same reverence other grandmothers reserve for saying grace. Grandma Ruth passed 2 years ago at 84, in her sleep, which was the single merciful thing that year handed us. She left behind a modest lake house on Church Lake, and a trust she'd assembled from 3 decades of county wages, roughly $240,000 for each granddaughter, Lauren and me, payable when we married or turned 35, whichever arrived first. The lake house came to us jointly, half mine, half Lauren's, every plank of the dock and every crooked window screen included. My mother referred to the trust as Ruth's little project. My father just signed wherever the attorney indicated. I called it what it actually was, the only inheritance in our family that arrived wrapped in love instead of conditions. Grandma Ruth left us one more thing she never put into writing. It took a wedding, a stranger's phone call, and one manila envelope for me to grasp what that was. Derek Callahan arrived in Maple Glen 3 years ago, 35 years old, a regional sales manager for a dental equipment company. The job kept him on the road 4 days a week, which I'd eventually understand was the entire purpose of the job. He looked like the man on page 12 of a catalog. Good teeth, firm handshake, sleeves cuffed at precisely the right spot. He learned every church lady's name within a month. He repaired my father's gutters without being asked, and he pursued me like a man who had prepared for it, which, as it happens, he had. He brought coffee to the office on Thursdays, black, no sugar, exactly how I drink it, a detail he noted on our first date and never once got wrong. My mother posted a photo of us on Facebook. It was the first time in my life I'd been the daughter worth sharing. We got engaged a year and a half before the wedding this story centers on. He proposed at the lake house at sunset. 2 things happened that spring that I filed away without realizing I was filing them. First, Derek asked a lot of questions about Grandma Ruth's trust, how it paid out, who administered it. Just curious about the tax side, babe. Second, I asked him to sign a prenuptial agreement. I'm a paralegal. I've watched marriages disintegrate on my desk like soggy cardboard. So for me, it was routine paperwork, not an accusation. Derek said, "Of course, no problem. Whatever makes you feel safe." But his smile stalled for 1 second, like an image buffering. In retrospect, that 1 second was the only honest thing Derek Callahan ever let me see. 14 months before the wedding, on an unremarkable Tuesday, I drove up to the lake house with a folder of insurance paperwork. The roof needed repairs. The adjuster needed signatures, and I handled the tedious tasks because that was my role in this family. I wasn't expected. That detail matters. Derek's truck sat in the gravel driveway, and my first thought, I want you to understand how innocent it was that he'd driven up to measure the roof for me. The screen door was unlocked. I stepped into my grandmother's living room and heard my sister laughing upstairs. That particular champagne laugh she reserved for audiences. Then I heard Derek's voice answering her, low, in a register I recognized. I stood perfectly still in the house where Grandma Ruth taught me to play gin rummy. On the windowsill where she used to keep a jar of peppermints for us, sat 2 wine glasses, one marked with my sister's lipstick. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't scream either. People always ask. I'm a paralegal. I don't scream. I take inventory. 2 vehicles in the driveway, 2 glasses on the sill, 1 engagement ring on my left hand, 4 months old. I removed the spare lake house key from my keychain, placed it on Grandma Ruth's kitchen table where they couldn't miss it, and walked back to my car on legs that seemed to belong to someone else. Then I sat behind the wheel and watched the lake be beautiful for a while, because it didn't know any better. On the drive back to town, my phone started vibrating against the passenger seat repeatedly, like something trapped. I assumed it was Derek choosing his words. It wasn't. It was my mother. And what she said when I finally picked up told me everything about the next 14 months. My mother didn't ask if I was okay. I need you to sit with that. Lauren had already called her crying, planting her version first, a skill my sister had honed since grade school. Mom's voice came through the phone, smooth as fondant. These things happen, Annie. You were always married to that job of yours. Lauren needs this. Don't make it ugly. That quickly, my engagement became a scheduling conflict. I asked her calmly, I'm told I'm always calm, whether she understood that her daughter had been seeing my fiancé. She sighed the way she sighed at wilting inventory and said, the heart wants what it wants. My father got on the line briefly, cleared his throat, and asked if I'd eaten. That was his entire speech. That was the most resistance Tom Parker could muster. Within a month, Derek and Lauren were public. The church gossiped for exactly 2 weeks, because that's how long it took my mother to work the room. By Easter, the story around town was airtight. The engagement had been quietly fading for ages. Poor Annie was married to her career. And really, Derek and Lauren were just one of those things God does. She told the casserole ladies I had given the couple my blessing. I discovered that at the pharmacy when a woman patted my arm and called me gracious. So the woman whose ring got repurposed became the villain's understudy, and the couple received a love story. That's what my mother could build with a narrative and a Sunday potluck. Here's the question I carried around all year. The one I'd answer at a church altar in front of 200 people. What do you owe the truth when the people you love only love the image? Keep that question in your pocket. We'll need it. 8 months before the wedding, Derek proposed to my sister with a 2-carat ring at a winery, with a photographer he'd booked ahead of time. Of course there was a photographer. The engagement announcement ran in the Maple Glen Courier with a half-page photo. Derek and Lauren on the dock of my grandmother's lake house, golden hour, his hand on the small of her back. My mother shared it to the town Facebook group she administers, and it spread the way small-town news spreads, which is to say, instantly and permanently. Then Mom did something that showed me how much this wedding meant to her, and I mean that numerically. She poured a portion of her retirement savings into it, the Grand Marion Ballroom for the reception. 200 guests, a photographer from Indianapolis, and a drone operator because apparently heaven needed its own footage. People called it the biggest wedding Maple Glen had ever witnessed, and my mother repeated that phrase like a rosary. Around that time, Lauren texted me for the first time in a year. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just this. Since you never use the lake house, would you sell me your half? Derek says it's smarter for taxes. I stared at that message for a long time, not at the request, but at how the second sentence began. Derek says. I typed back one short line, the most polite no I possess, and started paying attention in a new way. Because over the next few months, every plan that emerged from my sister's mouth arrived wearing that same little uniform. Derek says joint accounts are simpler. Derek says the trust should be working for us. Derek says. I started tallying how many of my sister's sentences opened that way. I stopped at 30, because by then I'd begun doing something more productive. I started listening like a paralegal. The invitation arrived on heavy cream cardstock addressed in calligraphy, with a smaller card tucked inside in my mother's own handwriting. We'd love you there, Annie. Just keep a low profile for everyone's sake. I set it on my kitchen counter and looked at it for 3 days. The way you look at a bill you can't dispute. And then I decided, alone in my duplex on Sycamore Street, exactly how this would unfold. I would attend my sister's wedding. I would wear navy, sit where they placed me, kiss my great-aunts, and smile for 0 photographs. And then once the cake was cut and the drone had landed, I would quietly extract myself from the Parker family orbit. No scene, no letter, no forwarding address for holidays. You can't fire your family, but you can stop showing up to the job. That was the entire plan. Dignity, then distance. I want that on the record because of what people in this town said about me afterward. That I'd spent months scheming. That I came to that church armed for revenge. No. 3 weeks before the wedding, I had nothing in my purse but breath mints and a resignation I hadn't spoken aloud. Then on a slow Tuesday afternoon, the light for line 2 started blinking at the office. Our receptionist was at lunch. I picked up the way I've picked up 10,000 times. Hartwell and Boone, this is Annie. A woman's voice came through the line from somewhere in Ohio, weary in a way I recognized from my own mirror. She said, I'm calling about a man named Derek Callahan. I believe he's getting married in your town. He can't, because he is still married to me. Her name was Melissa Callahan, and she was calling from Dayton, Ohio, 3 hours east of my desk. She told it plainly, the way exhausted people do. She had married Derek 9 years ago. They had a son, Caleb, who was 7 now. When Caleb was 2, Derek left for a sales conference in Indianapolis and simply never came home. No note, no filing, no forwarding address. She couldn't afford an attorney to divorce a man she couldn't locate. And the years did what years do. Then 2 weeks earlier, a cousin sent her a screenshot from a public Facebook group, an engagement announcement. Golden hour, a dock, a man's hand on a bride-to-be's back. My mother's proudest post, traveling further than she ever imagined. Melissa had spent those 2 weeks scraping together the courage to call a law firm in the groom's town, and she got me on the line. Now here's the thing about my job. I wanted to believe her instantly, and that's exactly why I didn't let myself. Wanting is how people get fooled. She could be an ex with a grudge. It could be a different Derek Callahan. You'd be surprised how many of any name exist. So I did what I was trained to do. I opened an intake form and wrote down everything. Full legal names, date of marriage, county that issued the license, the last address she had for him, and the name of the company he sold dental chairs for back then. It matched. My pen kept moving while my stomach dropped floor by floor, like a slow elevator. Before she hung up, Melissa said something I've thought about every day since. I don't want him back, honey. I want an address to serve him at. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and typed a records request to Montgomery County, Ohio. People lie, my grandmother used to say. Paper doesn't. We were about to find out. Quick pause. If your family ever asked you to stay quiet just to keep the image pristine, tell me about it in the comments and subscribe, because what came back in the mail is something you'll want to hear with your own ears. If you've never worked with public records, here's the part nobody explains. Marriage records are public in this country. Anyone, you, me, a tired baker from Dayton, can request a certified copy of anyone's marriage certificate from the county that issued it. It costs about the price of a large pizza. There's no national database that flags a man who marries in Ohio and applies for a license in Indiana. The system operates on the honesty of the person filling out the form. So that week, on my lunch breaks, I worked the problem like a case file. I requested a certified copy of the marriage record for Derek Michael Callahan and Melissa Ann Ruiz, Montgomery County, Ohio, 9 years back. Then I searched the divorce dockets Montgomery County and the 2 counties surrounding it. every year since their wedding. Nothing. No dissolution, no annulment, no legal separation. I paid for a clerk's letter confirming the search came up empty, because a missing record only matters when someone official says it's missing. And while I was in those dockets, I found a civil default judgment against Derek M. Callahan, 5 years old, for $38,000. Money he'd drained from accounts tied to Melissa's family bakery before he disappeared. Fraud reduced to a judgment he never paid, sitting in a courthouse where anyone could read it. The dates aligned with a gap in Derek's resume I'd once accepted without blinking. Friday afternoon, I laid the printouts on Harold Boone's desk and watched my boss read. Harold has been a small-town lawyer for 30 years, and nothing startles him. He removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and said, "Annie, if this certificate is real, your sister's wedding is a felony with catering." Then Harold said the second thing, the lawyer thing, the thing that cost me a week of sleep. "Until the certified copies arrive with a raised seal, you have a story, not proof. And if you say this out loud in Maple Glen before you can prove it, his attorney sends us a defamation letter by Thursday." He leaned back and looked at me kindly, which somehow made it worse. "Annie, think about the town. The jilted sister accuses the perfect groom. You'd lose in the court of public opinion before you ever reached a real one." He wasn't wrong. My mother had spent 14 months writing me into the role of the bitter one, and an accusation without paper would fit that costume as if it were tailored. So I waited for the mail, and at night I lay in my duplex doing math on the ceiling. If Melissa was telling the truth, my sister was 3 weeks from marrying a felony, from a honeymoon funded by Grandma Ruth's trust, from joint accounts with a man whose actual wife couldn't afford a lawyer. If Melissa was lying, and I ran with it, I would become permanently and officially the woman who tried to torch her sister's wedding out of spite. There was no version where I got to be certain and safe at the same time. I want to be honest about something. A small cold voice in me said, "Let it happen. You warned no one. You owe no one. Let the picture-perfect couple have their picture-perfect fraud." I noted that voice the way I'd note a hostile witness. Then on Saturday morning, I decided to try the gentlest door first. I texted my sister and asked her to coffee. Just us. It did not go the way I hoped. We met at Bean and Birch on Main, the coffee shop with the wobbly corner table, and my sister arrived 20 minutes late in full wedding planning mode, all binder tabs and highlighters. I hadn't been alone with her since the lake house. She looked genuinely happy, which complicated everything. I kept it soft. I asked about the flowers, the band, Mom's seating chart. Then I set my cup down and asked the one question I'd rehearsed. "Lauren, how much do you actually know about Derek's years in Ohio?" Her whole face shifted climate. She'd been waiting 14 months for me to say something exactly like that. And here I was, right on schedule, the bitter older sister with her little insinuations. She didn't even ask what I meant. That's the detail that still gets me. She never asked what I knew. She leaned across the table and said, low and triumphant, "It's not stealing if he chose me." Then she gathered her binder like a verdict and told me, "Some people can't stand watching other people be happy." She was gone before her latte cooled. 20 minutes later, my phone rang, and I knew who it was before I looked, because my sister has always had one reflex faster than her smile reporting to headquarters. My mother didn't bother with hello. "If you try to spoil this wedding, Annie, don't come at all. Do you understand me?" I understood everything. The sister door was closed. The mother door had never existed. I drove home to Sycamore Street with both hands on the wheel and did dishes until midnight, because dishes are honest work that can't be spun. Then, near 1:0 the morning, my phone lit up. A text from Melissa in Dayton. "You sound like you don't believe me yet. I understand. Come see for yourself. Bring nothing. I'll show you everything." That Saturday, I told no one where I was going. I put on jeans, filled a thermos, and drove 3 hours east on I-70 to a diner in Dayton, Ohio, next door to the bakery where Melissa works the ovens at 4 the morning. She was already in the booth when I arrived. She looked like her voice pretty once you saw past the exhaustion, with flour still faintly dusting one forearm, and in the booth beside her sat a small boy with Derek Callahan's exact chin, coloring a placemat. Caleb, 7 years old. He was drawing a house with 3 stick figures in front of it, and the tallest one, the father-shaped one, had no face. He just hadn't gotten to it yet, probably. I've never been able to make myself believe that. Melissa didn't do speeches. She reached into a paper grocery bag and slid something across the formica. And that slide, that soft scrape of laminate on tabletop, is the sound I will remember from this whole story when I've forgotten everything else. A marriage certificate, laminated like a diploma. Derek Michael Callahan and Melissa Ann Ruiz, Montgomery County, Ohio. 9 years ago, June. Signatures, seal, the works. Then she talked, and the pattern unrolled like carpet. Derek had courted her precisely when her mother's bakery was being sold, precisely as money was about to attach itself to her name. Charm, gutters fixed, coffee memorized. I could have recited it alongside her. Married in June, accounts merged by September, and then drained and gone before their son could say the word daddy, leaving her a judgment she couldn't collect and a marriage she couldn't afford to dissolve. "He doesn't marry women, honey," Melissa said, stirring coffee she never drank. "He marries money that comes with a woman attached." I was still holding the certificate when she looked up and added, almost gently, "There's one more thing you should know. It's about that trust your grandmother left." Here's what Melissa knew, secondhand but specific. A mutual friend from Derek's Ohio days, the one man he still drank with when he passed through, had heard Derek brag months earlier that his new fiancée had, quote, "an inheritance that unlocks the day we sign." That sentence reorganized my entire year, because Grandma Ruth's trust pays out on marriage. $240,000 released to Lauren the moment a marriage license comes back signed and filed. Derek hadn't asked me those curious little tax questions as my fiancé. He'd been reading the combination to a safe he intended to crack, and when I slid a prenup across the table, I turned the lock, so he switched doors to the sister who signs whatever's placed in front of her, and Lauren had already opened a joint account with him for the honeymoon. She told people, with both their names on it and no reason for patience after the ceremony. I asked Melissa what she wanted out of this, and I asked it carefully, because I needed to know what I was carrying home. She glanced at Caleb's placemat and kept her voice level. "I want him served with divorce papers at a real address. I want child support, and I want my son to stop asking why his dad's new family gets him and we don't. That's all, Annie. I'm not coming to burn a wedding. I'm coming to end a marriage that never ended." On the drive home, I stopped for gas outside Richmond, and while the tank filled, I went inside and bought a box of manila envelopes. I didn't know yet exactly what would go into one. I only knew all the way down who it would be for. 9 days before the wedding, the mail came through. Certified copy of the marriage certificate, raised seal from Montgomery County. The clerk's letter confirming no divorce on record anywhere Derek had lived. A certified copy of the $38,000 judgment, and a notarized affidavit from Melissa, which she'd sworn at her credit union on her lunch break, laying out the marriage, the abandonment, and the son. Paper doesn't lie. And now the paper had seals. Harold made 2 calls that afternoon with me sitting across his desk. The first went to the county prosecutor's office. They were interested, genuinely, Harold said. They perked up at the judgment, but interested has a speed limit. Verifying out-of-state records, coordinating with Ohio, reviewing for charges. Send us the full package. We'll look at it next week. The wedding was Saturday. Next week was a different universe. The second call went to the clerk's office, where we learned Derek and Lauren had already been issued their Indiana marriage license days earlier. On the application, under prior marriages, Derek had sworn none. That's perjury on a license affidavit, a crime all by itself, sitting in a filing cabinet. But a license, once issued, isn't something a clerk can retract over a phone call from a law firm. Here's what I want you to understand about that week. I did everything right. I found the truth. I verified it. I took it to the professionals. And every single door opened politely onto the same sentence. Not before Saturday. The law is a good tool, and a slow one. Weddings are fast. Sitting in my car outside the office, I realized there was one door left that wasn't an institution. It was a garage on Birchwood Lane. And inside it was the man who taught me to ride a bike. My father has fixed things his entire life. Breakers, ballasts, the neighbor's sump pump at 11 at night. I found him in his garage with the radio on, a week before the wedding, and I handed him the folder without a word, because I knew words would give him an exit. He read standing up under the shop light. He read the certificate twice. When he reached the affidavit, the part about Caleb, his hands began to tremble, and I watched my father age in real time under a 60-watt bulb. He believed me. I want that stated clearly for the record. My father looked at certified proof that the man marrying his younger daughter was already somebody's husband, and somebody's disappeared father. And Tom Parker believed every page of it. Then he squared the folder, closed it, and pushed it back across the workbench. "Annie," he said, "your mother put her retirement into this weekend. Lauren would never survive the shame, not in this town." And then, quieter, the sentence he actually needed. "Maybe he's changed. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding, and the Ohio gal can just handle her business after. He couldn't even finish it while looking at me. I stood in that garage where I'd spent the best hours of my childhood handing him wire strippers, and I understood something with terrible clarity. My father wasn't choosing Derek. He was choosing the photos. Same as always, just with higher stakes. The worst part of my whole story isn't the sister who took my fiancé or the mother who took her side. It's the father who believed me and folded anyway. I picked up my folder, kissed his cheek so he'd know the account wasn't closed forever, and drove back to Sycamore Street. One door left now. It wore a collar on Sundays, and I'd have to time it perfectly. People ask why I never confronted Derek directly. Give him a chance to vanish quietly, spare the family the scene. Here's the arithmetic on that. A man who has already abandoned one marriage does not repent when cornered. He accelerates. Showed Derek my folder on Wednesday, and by Thursday he's talked Lauren into a romantic little courthouse elopement 2 counties over. The license was already issued. Any officiant would do. And the trust unlocks before my certified mail even lands, or he empties the joint account and evaporates, and Melissa loses the address she'd waited 5 years for. Warning him wasn't mercy. It was handing the fastest man in the family a head start. So at the rehearsal dinner, my mother insisted on her phrase printed on a chalkboard she'd bought for the occasion. I said almost nothing. I passed the green beans. I compared notes on humidity with my great aunt. And one time, when Derek was holding court about honeymoon plans, I set down my fork and tried a single flat sentence across the table. Dayton's nice this time of year, isn't it, Derek? His face did the thing again. That 1 second buffer, the picture stalling. And then, the smile reloaded, and he said he'd never really spent time in Ohio. My sister squeezed his arm. My mother refilled his glass. After dinner, in the hallway by the coat closet, he found me. He stood close, kept his voice warm for anyone passing, and said, "Whatever you think you know, Annie, nobody hears you. They stopped listening years ago." Then he smiled like the catalog and added, "See you Saturday. Sit somewhere, the camera can't find you." Even his threats were about the pictures. He'd learned the house rules faster than I ever had. Thursday evening, 2 days out, the Grand Marion glowed like a cruise ship. Rehearsal dinner for 60. My mother moved through the ballroom with a clipboard, radiant, fully alive, directing centerpieces like a woman conducting the orchestra she'd waited 61 years to stand in front of. I asked her for 10 minutes. I got 4. In the hallway by the ice machine. I held the folder where she could see it and said, "Mom, before Saturday, you need to read what's in here. It's about Derek. It's certified. It's real." She looked at the folder the way she once looked at my braces. She didn't reach for it. She smoothed the front of her jacket and delivered the speech she must have been drafting since the day I answered line 2. "I have 200 guests coming. A photographer from Indianapolis and a drone, Annie. Whatever is in that folder, it is 2 days too late and one sister too bitter. You will sit in the back row. You will smile, and you will not ruin the photos." Then she walked back into the light and laughed at something the caterer said, and I stood by the ice machine listening to it make ice, which at least was honest work. Something in me finished breaking, and the break was clean. You will not ruin the photos. 22 years after a Christmas card with 3 people in it, the frame had never once widened to fit me, and it never would. I walked to my car through the warm June dark, sat behind the wheel, and called Dayton. Melissa answered on the second ring, wide awake. Bakers and paralegals. Nobody sleeps the week before a felony. "Come," I said. "Come Saturday. Bring your certificate and bring Caleb's birth certificate, and I'll buy the tickets myself tonight." A long breath traveled 300 miles of phone line. Then she said, "We'll be there Friday night." The wedding was 2 days away, and there was no turning back now for either of us. Before we get to that Saturday, tell me something in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and telling the truth? Because I was about to find out what that choice actually costs. Stay with me. Melissa and Caleb landed in Indianapolis on Friday evening, and I drove them to a motel out by the highway, past the edge of anywhere my mother's Facebook group could reach. Caleb fell asleep against his mother's shoulder in my back seat, and Melissa and I sat in the parking lot afterward with the dome light off. 2 women planning the calmest ambush in Indiana history, because here's what this was not going to be. It was not going to be a scene from a soap opera. No standing up mid-ceremony to shout objections, no phones held high, no screaming match by the gift table. If we did it that way, my mother would have the whole thing repackaged by Sunday brunch. The bitter sister hired an actress. Poor Lauren. Pray for the Parkers. Spectacle was their language. We would not be speaking it. Instead, we'd speak mine. I laid out the plan against the steering wheel. Everything went into one envelope: the certified marriage certificate, the clerk's letter showing no divorce on any docket, the judgment, Melissa's notarized affidavit with her phone number written at the top in blue ink. And the envelope would go to exactly one man, Reverend Hale, the officiant. Not to my parents who'd bury it, not to Lauren who'd hand it straight to Derek. The officiant is the one person at a wedding with actual legal authority in the moment. The man whose signature transforms a party into a marriage. A minister who has credible proof the groom is currently married cannot lawfully sign that license. And Reverend Hale had buried my grandmother. He would read every page. Melissa listened, nodded, and then asked the question I'd been dodging for 3 weeks. "You're protecting the sister who took your fiancé," she said. "Why?" I looked out at the parking lot lights for a while. "I'll let you know Saturday," I said. That night at my kitchen table, I wrote a single line on the front of the envelope. "For Reverend Hale before you sign anything." Saturday arrived hot and blue, a postcard of a June day. The kind of weather my mother would have taken personal credit for. First Methodist wore more white roses than it had seen in a century of funerals and Easter services combined. The Indianapolis photographer prowled the aisle with 2 cameras. Outside, the drone operator ran his checks, and the thing rose and hovered over the steeple like a mechanical hornet waiting for its moment. I keep calling it that. And I'll keep calling it that, because that's what it was. I arrived early, alone in navy, with my grandmother's silver brooch pinned over my heart, and one manila envelope flat inside my purse. At the door, a teenage usher checked his laminated chart, walked me past pew after pew of people who'd known me since kindergarten, and delivered me to the very back row beside the sound booth. A little printed card waited on the cushion. Reserved A. Parker. My mother had actually printed a card so there'd be no confusion about where the unphotogenic daughter belonged. 2 rows up, one of my great aunts twisted around and stage whispered to her neighbor, "Why on earth is the sister back there?" The neighbor, a bridesmaid's mother with excellent intelligence, whispered back, "Carol's orders. For the pictures. For the pictures." Somewhere under my ribs, a 1-2-year-old in braces sat down next to me and buckled in. My phone buzzed once against my hip. "Melissa, we're in the parking lot. Whenever you're ready, or never. Your call, either way. I want you to notice that the plan had an off switch until the very last second, and the off switch was mine. I could hand the envelope over quietly after the ceremony. Let the lawyers unwind it all in a month. Let the fraud become official before anyone stopped it. Or never." I texted back the last piece of the plan. "Wait in the narthex once the doors close. Watch through the glass." Then I turned my phone face down as the organ began, and 200 heads swung toward the doors like one creature. You should know that my sister was breathtaking. I've earned the right to say cruel things about Lauren, and I'm telling you, she came down that aisle like weather, like something you plan your whole day around, and the entire church made that soft sound crowds make. My father walked her, gray-faced and handsome in his rented tuxedo, and even from 12 rows back, I could see his jaw working, and I still wonder what it cost him to hand her to a man whose marriage certificate he'd read under a shop light. My mother stood at the front pew in champagne silk, chin raised, presiding. This was her painting, decades in the making, finally hung. And Lauren, here's what nobody warns you about. Lauren looked happy. Not smug, not staged. Genuinely, radiantly happy. My baby sister, 31 years old, marrying the love of her life in front of everyone who mattered. Doubt sat down next to me, right on the reserved card. What if I let this be? Who appointed me the family's fact checker? The certified copies weren't wrong. Seals don't have moods. But for one long minute, I interrogated every step that had led me to this pew with this envelope, and my heart mounted quite a defense for silence. Then the procession reached the altar, and I watched Derek take my sister's hands. And Reverend Hale, 66 years old, silver-haired, the man who read the 23rd Psalm over Grandma Ruth's casket, looked out at the congregation the way he always does before he begins. His eyes moved across us like a benediction, row by row, and they snagged just for a second on the last row. On me. The man had known our family for 40 years. He knew exactly whose sister was seated by the sound booth, and something in his face asked a quiet question. I didn't know it yet, but mine had already answered. The ceremony was beautiful, if you like that sort of thing. And I say that as someone who once planned this exact ceremony with this exact groom. Reverend Hale spoke about faithfulness, which the universe apparently has a sense of humor about. A cousin sang. My mother dabbed her eyes on schedule. and the drone drifted past the stained glass windows outside, its little motor humming like the town's collective attention. And then, during the ring exchange, the universe handed me one final gift, and it came, as truth often does, from a man who'd had 3 bourbons at lunch. The best man, Derek's golf buddy, imported from Cincinnati, leaned in while passing the ring and murmured something meant to be private, but churches are built to carry sound. Every usher learns that the hard way, and so did he. Lake house honeymoon, he breathed, then straight to the bank Monday, right? And Derek, my sister's almost husband, standing at God's own altar, winked. A wink at the altar, about the bank, about my grandmother's trust unlocking in roughly 4 minutes. The moment ink hit that license, whatever was left of my doubt stood up, gathered its things, and left the building. I touched Grandma Ruth's brooch. People lie, she told a 17-year-old girl in a records office 31 years deep. Paper doesn't. Sealed, certified patient, it was sitting 12 rows from the only man in the building legally required to care what it said. Reverend Hale turned the page in his book. Then he said the old words, the ones every wedding includes and no wedding means. If anyone here can show just cause why these two may not lawfully be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace. 200 people smiled and held their breath for the pretty little pause, the pause where nothing ever happens. I unclasped my purse. I need to slow down and show you the fork in the road, because this is the exact moment my whole life sat in my 2 hands, and I want you to weigh what I weighed. Option 1, keep my peace, stay seated, let the pause pass, let them sign, the trust unlocks. And then inevitably, mathematically, Derek does what Derek does. A year, maybe less, and the accounts are dry. The lake house is leveraged. My sister is ruined, and my mother's masterpiece wedding becomes the most expensive photograph in Indiana. And me? I'm blameless. I warned them. I went to my sister, my mother, my father, one by one, and every one of them chose the picture. All I had to do was keep being what this family had raised me to be. The quiet one in the back, out of frame, holding her tongue. Revenge without fingerprints. Punishment I didn't even have to administer, because they had built the machine themselves and climbed inside it. I'm not going to pretend that voice wasn't loud, or that it wasn't at least a little bit sweet, but sitting there in row 12, I did the inventory. A 7-year-old draws his father with no face. My grandmother polishes the county seal on a Friday night and tells me paper is the only thing that doesn't lie. A 1-2-year old holds a light reflector so her family can look perfect without her in it. And I understood all at once and completely that if I sat still now, I wasn't punishing them, I was joining them. Silence to protect the picture. That was the family business. And this was my final interview. The truth wasn't a favor Lauren had earned. It was just the only thing I had that was real. And the only person it could still save was standing at that altar in white. Reverend Hale opened his book to the vows. I opened my purse and I stood up. Derek was mid-vow when my pew creaked. He was actually saying the words forsaking all others, as long as we both shall live, when 200 heads began turning toward the back of the church in a slow wave, like grass bending in wind. The organist half rose from her bench. The photographer's shutter went still. Even the drone outside seemed to bank toward the windows. And I walked 40 steps down the center aisle of First Methodist and Navy, in flats, my grandmother's brooch catching the stained glass light. A manila envelope held flat against my side. I was not fast. I was not slow. I filed motions with more drama than that walk. Somewhere on my left I heard my mother rise, heard her voice crack across the hush like a dropped tray. Annie, the photos. And I want you to know I felt nothing snap in me when she said it. No rage, no triumph. Just confirmation arriving on schedule that even now, even here, the frame mattered more than what was standing inside it. Derek's face found me over my sister's shoulder, and I watched the catalog smile do its little buffer, and this time it did not reload. Lauren turned last, confused, then irritated. Then, when she saw the envelope, something older than either, I did not look at her long. I walked to Reverend Hale, who had not moved, whose face had gone very still and very kind, and I held out the envelope with both hands, the way you hand someone something heavy. I kept my voice low, but the church was so quiet it carried anyway, and half of Maple Glen will recite my next words at potlucks until I die. Reverend, before you sign anything today, you need to read what's in here. I'm sorry, it has to be now. Then I stepped back, folded my hands and waited. Reverend Hale looked at me for a long moment, and he opened the envelope. Reverend Hale read the way careful men read slowly, twice. He read the certificate with its raised seal. He read the clerk's letter. He unfolded Melissa's affidavit, and I watched his eyes stop partway down. On the paragraph I knew was about the boy. The church made no sound at all. 200 people. A drone idling somewhere above the steeple. And the only noise in First Methodist was paper turning. My mother started up the side aisle with her event coordinator's smile bolted on, hissing something about a family matter and the reception schedule, and Reverend Hale did something I have never seen anyone do in 40 years of knowing her. He held up one hand, and my mother stopped walking. Then he removed his reading glasses, looked at the groom, and asked in the voice he uses over caskets, "Derek, is any of this true? Are you, at this moment, a married man?" And here is where Derek Callahan, professional charmer, made the mistake that sank him faster than any document could. He laughed, that easy golf course laugh, hands spreading wide, and said, "Reverend, come on! That's ancient paperwork. Ohio stuff. We were basically separated. It wasn't even a real." He stopped on his own. No one had interrupted him. The sound of the room had simply changed. A whole congregation inhaling at once. 200 people doing the math on, basically. My sister's bouquet dipped very slowly, like something wilting and fast forward. Lauren looked at the envelope, then at Derek, and asked in a small voice the microphone caught and threw to the rafters, "What paperwork from Ohio, baby?" And before Derek could reload the smile, the double doors at the back of the church opened, and the answer to her question walked in, wearing her good dress and holding the hand of a 7-year-old boy. Melissa did not storm the altar. She stopped a respectful distance down the aisle, in the manner of a woman returning something that had been delivered to her house by mistake, and she spoke as calmly as she'd spoken to me on the line. "I'm not here to shout," she said. "My name is Melissa Callahan. I have been Mrs. Derek Callahan for 9 years." Nobody moved. Somewhere in the pews, a hymnal slid to the floor, and nobody picked it up. And then Melissa looked down at her son, and Caleb looked at the man in the tuxedo. And in the pin-drop silence of that church, a small voice said something with no anger in it at all, just recognition, the way you name an animal at the zoo. "Hi, Dad. I have witnessed a lot of destruction in my line of work. Foreclosures, custody fights, wills read aloud to hungry rooms. I have never seen anything level a building like that little boy's hello." Women I'd known my whole life put their hands over their mouths in one motion. A whole pew of church ladies turning to face Derek like a firing squad in florals. Derek bolted. There's no elegant word for it. He dropped my sister's hands and moved fast down the side aisle toward the exit by the choir door. And that is when my father, Tom Parker, 63 years old, silent his entire life at every moment that mattered, stepped out of the front pew and filled the doorway like a man who'd been rehearsing it for a week. "Sit down, son," my father said in the voice he saved for down power lines. "You'll want witnesses for whatever you say next." What broke the room's paralysis strangely was my mother, and her instinct even then told me everything. She spun toward the balcony, toward the Indianapolis photographer, frozen mid-aisle, and cried out, "Turn that camera off! Turn it off!" Not a question for the groom, not an arm around her daughter. Lights first. Reverend Hale closed his book with a sound like a verdict. "There will be no wedding today," he said, gently and absolutely. "I cannot solemnize this union, and I will not." He lifted the marriage license from the little table beside him, the license with Derek's sworn none under prior marriages, and set it aside, unsigned, the way you set aside evidence. And my mother, casting around the wreckage of her masterpiece for someone her size to blame, found me standing quietly at the foot of the altar. "You did this," she said, shaking champagne silk in fury. "You couldn't stand it. You have never been able to stand it." I let her run out of road. Then I said the only thing I had walked 40 steps to say, and I said it the way Grandma Ruth would have, level as a ledger line. "Mom, you seated me where I couldn't ruin the photos. So I saved the family instead." Grandma taught me the difference. She stared at me as though I'd spoken Latin, and maybe in her language, I had. Behind us, the certificate had begun traveling hand to hand down the pews, like a collection plate in reverse, silver-haired heads bowing over the seal, and I watched the town my mother had spent 30 years curating read the truth for itself, off a piece of certified paper. Derek made one last play. He turned to my sister, palms open, and said the sentence that finished him for good. "Babe, listen, we can fix this. The trust paperwork's already, the trust paperwork." At his own detonated wedding, with his actual wife standing in the aisle, and his actual son watching from her hip level, the man's mind went to the trust paperwork out loud, into a microphone. My sister looked at him. Really looked, maybe for the first time in 14 months. And I watched the whole architecture of her fantasy come down with no sound, like a building imploding on mute. She didn't scream at him. "I'll always be a little proud of that." She pulled the 2-carat ring off her finger, took his hand, and pressed the ring into his palm, folding his fingers over it the way you return something borrowed. Derek looked around the church then at the pews, the flowers, the frozen photographer, my mother's ruined masterpiece, and he laughed once, short and cold, the buffer gone for good, and gave us his honest opinion at last. "You people," he said, "would rather look happy than be smart. That's why this was easy." Nobody answered him. There was nothing to answer. The man had just read our family Bible out loud. He walked out through the door, my father unblocked with a slow, contemptuous step aside, and a sheriff's deputy in the 5th row, my second cousin's husband, off duty, who'd come for the open bar, followed him out to the parking lot and wrote down his plate, his make, and his direction of travel. Because Monday was coming for Derek Callahan, whether he believed in it or not. Inside, 200 guests sat in a flower-drowned church with no wedding in it. And my sister stood alone at the altar in her white dress, in the wreckage of the best day of her life, looking around for help. She looked for our mother. Our mother was looking at the cameras. I found Lauren 20 minutes later on the floor of the bridal room, $1,000 of tulle pooled around her like spilled milk, mascara mapping her face. I brought her a glass of water because that's what I had. She took it with both hands like a child. And for a while, neither of us said anything. 2 sisters alone together for the first time in 14 months, in the debris of everything. Then Lauren said the truest thing I ever heard her say. "He didn't choose me, Annie. He chose the trust fund. You were the only one he couldn't fool." She laughed wet and broken into the water glass. "I took him because for once something of yours looked good on me. That's what they raised me to do. Look good in things." And there it was. The whole machine laid open by the person it was built around. My little sister, 4 years old in ringlets, taught before she could read that being looked at was being loved. We were manufactured in the same factory, just different departments. I sat down next to her on the floor, wedding dress in navy, and she put her head on my shoulder and cried like the 7-year-old 2 rooms away probably wanted to. Behind us, the certificate had begun traveling hand to hand down the pews, like a collection plate in reverse, silver-haired heads bowing over the seal, and I watched the town my mother had spent 30 years curating read the truth for itself off a piece of certified paper. Derek made one last play. He turned to my sister, palms open, and said the sentence that finished him for good. "Babe, listen, we can fix this. The trust paperwork's already, the trust paperwork, at his own detonated wedding, with his actual wife standing in the aisle and his actual son watching from her hip level." The man's mind went to the trust paperwork, out loud, into a microphone. My sister looked at him. Really looked, maybe for the first time in 14 months. And I watched the whole architecture of her fantasy come down with no sound, like a building imploding on mute. She didn't scream at him. I'll always be a little proud of that. She pulled the 2-carat ring off her finger, took his hand, and pressed the ring into his palm, folding his fingers over it the way you return something borrowed. Derek looked around the church then at the pews, the flowers, the frozen photographer, my mother's ruined masterpiece, and he laughed once, short and cold, the buffer gone for good, and gave us his honest opinion at last. "You people," he said, "would rather look happy than be smart. That's why this was easy." Nobody answered him. There was nothing to answer. The man had just read our family Bible out loud. He walked out through the door my father unblocked with a slow, contemptuous step aside, and a sheriff's deputy in the 5th row, my second cousin's husband, off duty, who'd come for the open bar, followed him out to the parking lot and wrote down his plate, his make, and his direction of travel. Because Monday was coming for Derek Callahan, whether he believed in it or not. Inside, 200 guests sat in a flower-drowned church with no wedding in it, and my sister stood alone at the altar in her white dress in the wreckage of the best day of her life, looking around for help. She looked for our mother. Our mother was looking at the cameras. I found Lauren 20 minutes later on the floor of the bridal room. $1,000 of tulle pooled around her like spilled milk, mascara mapping her face. I brought her a glass of water because that's what I had. She took it with both hands like a child. And for a while, neither of us said anything. 2 sisters alone together for the first time in 14 months, in the debris of everything. Then Lauren said the truest thing I ever heard her say. "He didn't choose me, Annie. He chose the trust fund. You were the only one he couldn't fool." She laughed wet and broken into the water glass. "I took him because for once, Something of yours looked good on me. That's what they raised me to do. Look good in things. And there it was. The whole machine laid open by the person it was built around. My little sister, 4 years old in ringlets, taught before she could read that being looked at was being loved. We were manufactured in the same factory, just different departments. I sat down next to her on the floor, wedding dress and navy, and she put her head on my shoulder and cried like the 7-year-old 2 rooms away probably wanted to. The door opened. My mother stood in it, mascara intact, already retooling. "We'll say the wedding was postponed," she announced to the room. "Illness. People respect illness." Then her eyes found me, and I watched her choose her words, and she chose these. "Annie, it's best you're not in the follow-up photos. We'll explain it as travel." And the strangest thing happened. Or rather, didn't. It didn't hurt. 22 years, that sentence had been living in my chest, rent-free, and it finally missed. "I know, Mom," I said. "I was never going to be." I kissed my sister's head and walked out. Here's how it all landed. Once the dust and the drones settled, Derek was charged with perjury for the sworn lie on the marriage license application, none under prior marriages. In his own confident handwriting, the Ohio judgment followed him too. $38,000 doesn't evaporate. It waits. His company let him go within the month. Something about a morals clause and several clients in the congregation. Melissa's divorce finally moved, because now the papers had an address to find him at. And with it came 5 years of back child support, calculated by a formula that has no interest in charm, because no marriage ever happened, the trust never unlocked. Grandma Ruth's $240,000 sat untouched in its account, and the joint honeymoon fund got closed by Lauren the following Tuesday, with Harold walking her through it pro bono and me standing behind her chair. The lake house stayed whole, every dockboard, every crooked screen. 2 weeks later, Melissa texted me a photo of Caleb grinning outside the bakery with a court date circled on a calendar behind him. And underneath it, she'd kept the caption blunt, the way she keeps everything. Filed. Served. Free. My mother, meanwhile, did exactly what my mother does. The Facebook post went up that Sunday. "The wedding has been postponed as our family navigates a private matter. We are thankful for your prayers." And the casserole brigade arrived by Wednesday, half in sympathy, half in reconnaissance. The frame survived. The frame always survives. But something in this town had shifted anyway, because 200 people had read that certificate with their own eyes, and you cannot photograph your way out of a raised seal. 3 weeks after the wedding that wasn't, on a Saturday morning, somebody knocked on the lake house door while I was sanding the dock rails, and I opened it to find my sister standing on Grandma Ruth's porch, holding 2 gas station coffees. "No makeup, no phone, no audience. You still take it black?" she asked. And that was the whole apology, and I decided it was enough to start with. We spent the afternoon painting the dock, mostly in silence, the good kind, the kind our family never mastered. She told me she'd started seeing a counselor in Fort Wayne, where nobody knows our last name. I told her about the counties Grandma used to quiz me on, and she laughed at the wrong part, and it was fine. Around 4, my father's truck crunched up the gravel, and Tom Parker got out with his toolbox and, without a word about June, fixed the gutter that's been sagging since the funeral. That's his language. I've decided to be fluent in it. My mother didn't come. She hasn't, and she may not. And I've stopped standing at that particular window. Some chains you break for yourself, some people have to break their own. And my mother is still in there somewhere, straightening frames. But late that afternoon, Lauren and I sat on the freshly painted dock with our feet over the water. 2 of Ruth Wade's granddaughters, unphotographed, unposted, completely out of frame. For the first time in my life, nobody was watching us. And I have never in my life felt more seen. If your family only loves you inside the frame of a photograph, step out of the frame, because the people worth keeping will follow you into the plain, ordinary light. And the ones who won't were only ever posing. That's my story. 1 envelope. A reserved card in the last row. A little boy who said, "Hi Dad, if you've ever been the one who kept the family honest and got blamed for it anyway, tell me your story in the comments." I read every one. And subscribed to Calm Drama Stories, because quiet women keep the receipts. And there are more envelopes where this one came from.